I still remember that Thanksgiving like it was yesterday. The way the house smelled of roasted turkey and pine, the soft hum of conversation mingling with the clink of cutlery, and the underlying warmth that usually made family gatherings feel like a safe haven. But that day, something was off. As soon as Lauren and I stepped through the door, I could feel the weight of a secret I'd been carrying for 2 agonizing weeks. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that Lauren had been unfaithful. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I stayed silent, letting the evidence pile up while I wrestled with a torrent of emotions. I kept it all hidden, waiting for the right moment to let the truth spill out. I convinced myself that exposing her in front of my family would be cathartic, a necessary reckoning that I had been dreading yet anticipating in equal measure. Sitting at the long, polished dining table, surrounded by familiar faces, my parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, I tried to maintain the mask of normalcy. Every smile, every toast felt like a cruel reminder of the lies I'd been living with. Lauren, sitting right next to me, seemed almost too calm. I could see the glint in her eyes that hinted at secrets, and every time she caught my gaze, it was as if she knew something I hadn't yet said out loud. I reached a breaking point as the laughter grew louder and the festive chatter filled the room. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat hammering the truth deeper into my mind until it was impossible to ignore. I could no longer stand the charade. With every fiber of my being screaming for honesty, I stood up abruptly. The room fell silent, the conversation grinding to a halt as every eye turned toward me. "Lauren," I began, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and pain, "I know about your affair." The words echoed in the sudden quiet, as if the entire room was holding its breath. In that frozen moment, time seemed to stretch out, every second loaded with memories of betrayal and heartache. I watched as Lauren's eyes widened, not with remorse, but with an almost mischievous spark. Instead of the panic or sorrow I expected, she simply smiled, a defiant, unapologetic smile that cut through the silence like a knife. There was no trace of guilt in her expression, only a cool acceptance of the consequences that were now unfolding before everyone. Her admission was implicit in that look. There was no need for further explanation or denial. Her smile said it all. The room was a cacophony of shocked murmurs and gasps, the faces around me a mixture of disbelief and concern. My parents, who had always seen me as the rock of the family, now looked on with a mix of sorrow and confusion. Every heartbeat reminded me of the magnitude of what had just transpired. My private pain now laid bare for everyone to see. In that moment, I felt a surge of liberation mixed with crushing despair. I had set the truth free, but in doing so, I shattered the veneer of a perfect family dinner. The realization hit me hard. This was no longer a celebration of gratitude, but a stage for betrayal, for the unraveling of trust that had once bound us all together. The dinner, which had begun with so much promise, was now irrevocably changed. As I sat back down, the silence was deafening. I could feel the weight of every disappointed gaze and every whispered conversation. I was caught between the overwhelming need to scream and the paralyzing shock that had overtaken me. My confession had not only upended my life, but had also thrown an entire family into chaos, leaving me to wonder if the price of truth was indeed worth this agony. That Thanksgiving dinner was not just a meal, it was a turning point. In exposing Lauren, I had hoped to reclaim a semblance of control over my shattered life, but instead, I was left to navigate a maze of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of loss. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see that moment vividly. The cold stare of judgment from my family, Lauren's infuriatingly calm demeanor, and the inescapable reality that nothing would ever be the same again. The room descended into chaos almost as soon as Lauren's words sliced through the tension like a razor. I stood there, numb and disbelieving, as my family struggled to process the raw, painful truth that had just upended our Thanksgiving dinner. My mother's eyes welled up instantly, tears streaming down her face in quiet, heartbroken sobs. My father's hand tightened into a fist, the muscles in his arms knotting with fury and betrayal, while Brooke, my usually unflappable sister, clutched her head as if trying to contain the shock and disbelief crashing over her. Then came the moment I never thought I'd witness. Lauren, cool and unrepentant, said the words that made my heart sink even further. "I didn't go because Alex pays for everything. The house, the trips, my Range Rover." Her tone was almost casual, as if discussing the weather, but the venom in her delivery left no room for misunderstanding. In that moment, every whispered doubt about our marriage crystallized into a painful reality. I could barely register the sound of a delicate glass being lifted. Brooke, whose shock had quickly morphed into indignation, reached for a glass of wine, a vintage so expensive it practically screamed of status and excess. In one swift, defiant motion, she overturned the glass, and the rich, red liquid cascaded onto Lauren. The wine soaked into her clothes and trailed down her face, a symbolic act of retribution that echoed the intensity of the emotions swirling around us. It was as if, in that very instant, every suppressed anger, every silent cry of hurt, had found its voice. I felt caught in a vortex of emotions: humiliation, anger, despair, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. The sanctity of our family gathering, once a source of comfort and unity, had been completely shattered. Every passing second only deepened the wound, making it harder to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the cold, callous figure before me. Unable to stand the mounting chaos any longer, I bolted from the table. I could no longer bear the stifling tension, the stares of shock, and the undeniable evidence of my crumbling world. I grabbed my coat in a frantic rush and pushed through the throng of arguing voices, leaving behind a scene that felt more like a battlefield than a family home. As I reached the door, the sounds of chaos followed me. I paused just long enough to catch the final, searing moment. My father's voice, sharp and commanding, reverberated from within. "Lauren, get out of my house," he bellowed, his tone laced with an anger that seemed to reverberate off the walls. That final command, slicing through the din of discontent, marked the definitive end of any semblance of normalcy that had once defined our family dinners. Stepping out into the cool night, I was struck by the bitter irony of it all. The crisp air was a stark contrast to the fiery tumult I had just escaped. My mind raced as I tried to process everything: the betrayals, the accusations, the tears and outbursts that now haunted the space I'd once considered home. I walked aimlessly for a while, each step carrying me further from the wreckage of my shattered trust. The hurt inside me was a relentless, pounding force, every beat of my heart a reminder of the betrayal I had silently endured. I couldn't help but wonder if the woman I had loved, the partner I had trusted, was ever truly capable of genuine affection. Lauren's words, cold and calculated, had exposed a truth far more painful than any lie, a truth that went to the very core of what I had believed about our life together. At that moment, amid the swirling emotions and the bitter solitude of the night, I began to question everything. Was I just a convenient provider, a means to an end, rather than a beloved partner? Could I ever reconcile the dual images of the Lauren I thought I knew and the woman who had just shattered our family's facade with her reckless honesty? The questions echoed in my mind as I struggled to come to terms with the gravity of the situation. I found myself drifting through the empty streets, each step punctuated by the cacophony of memories from the night. The image of Brooke's impassioned act, her defiant pouring of that expensive wine, haunted me, a symbol of our family's refusal to let deceit slide under the guise of comfort. Even as I walked away, the finality of my father's words lingered, resonating with a mix of anger and sorrow that I knew would echo in my thoughts for a long time to come. In that moment, I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The foundation on which I had built my world, trust, love, and loyalty, had been irrevocably cracked. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I couldn't help but feel that this night, this scandal in the family circle, was only the beginning of a series of revelations that would force me to question everything I had once taken for granted. I stumbled toward my car, still reeling from the chaos inside the house. The bitter taste of betrayal lingered on my tongue, and every step felt heavier than the last. I fumbled with my keys, desperate to escape the wreckage of shattered trust, when a familiar figure suddenly appeared in my peripheral vision. It was Sean, the same Sean who had always been a friendly face at work, a reliable colleague. I couldn't believe my eyes. Before I could process his presence, he closed the distance between us. My mind raced as I recalled Lauren's parting words from the dinner, a final, cruel barb that revealed everything. She had called him to pick her up. In that moment, I realized that the labyrinth of lies had just become even more convoluted. Sean wasn't there by coincidence. He was an active participant in Lauren's carefully orchestrated exit. I felt a surge of anger boiling up inside me, a mix of hurt and disbelief that no longer allowed for any semblance of restraint. In a flash of fury, I reached out and grabbed him by his jacket. Time seemed to slow as I shoved him hard, sending him crashing onto the hood of my Tesla. The impact jolted me, yet all I could feel was a raw, unfiltered rage that demanded retribution for every lie and every stolen moment of trust. The situation escalated even further when I heard the deep, resonant voice of my father cutting through the night. He had come out of the house, his expression dark with a mix of disappointment and concern, and he barked, "Alex, let him go before things get any worse." His words, stern and uncompromising, reminded me of the precarious line I was teetering on, a line between defending my honor and plunging further into a spiral of chaos. I hesitated, my grip faltering as the realization sank in. Even my own father was now drawn into this sordid drama. For a brief, disorienting moment, I was caught between the need for immediate justice and the cold, rational voice of reason. But before I could decide, another scene unfolded that would cement the night's harrowing narrative. Without any hesitation or remorse, Lauren emerged once again from the maelstrom of our shattered family dinner. Instead of confronting the consequences of her actions, she strode over to her car as if she were merely concluding an ordinary day. Sliding into the driver's seat with an air of absolute nonchalance, she left with Sean, her lover, without even looking back. Her departure was as cold and final as the bite of winter air, and it stung more deeply than any verbal insult could. I stood there, frozen in a surreal mix of anger, disbelief, and profound sorrow. My hands, still trembling from the force of my actions, slowly released their grip on Sean's jacket. He lay there on the shiny hood of my car, an unwilling symbol of the betrayal that had infiltrated every corner of my life. I searched his face for any sign of regret or explanation, but all I saw was a conflicted look that offered no solace. The absurdity of it all sank in. Here I was, left to pick up the pieces of a relationship that had disintegrated in front of an audience, only to be further betrayed by someone I had considered a friend. The surreal nature of the evening made it almost impossible to believe that this was my life, a life where love, trust, and loyalty had been twisted into instruments of hurt and humiliation. My father's admonishment still echoed in my ears as I tried to steady myself. He had seen enough and understood that a violent escalation would only lead to further ruin. I could feel his disappointment as palpable as the night air, and I knew that this was not just about Lauren or Sean. It was about every shattered expectation, every broken promise that had led to this moment. As I finally stepped away from the car, the harsh reality of the night began to set in. The cool breeze did little to calm the storm raging inside me. Instead, It served as a stark reminder that my life had veered off its once predictable course, spiraling into a series of events that seemed more like a script for a tragic drama than my own reality. I couldn't help but question everything: the authenticity of my relationships, the integrity of the people I trusted, and even the path I had chosen in life. I found myself teetering on the edge of an abyss, the painful duality of anger and sorrow pulling me in opposite directions. The betrayal was not only personal, it was systemic. Lauren's calculated maneuver had exposed a hidden underbelly of our interactions, one where money, status, and convenience outweighed genuine love and loyalty. Her nonchalance, her absolute lack of remorse as she drove away with Sean, made me realize that nothing in our relationship had ever been as genuine as I had believed. In that moment, the weight of the world pressed down on me with an almost physical force. I retreated to the relative solitude of my car, my mind churning with a tumult of emotions. The rearview mirror offered me a final, fleeting glimpse of the departing taillights of Lauren's car, a visual metaphor for everything I had lost. Each blink of the taillight was a reminder that the past was irretrievable, that the life I once knew had evaporated in the harsh glare of betrayal and deceit. As I sat there, alone in the dark, silent night, I began to understand that this was not just an isolated incident of infidelity. It was the unraveling of a carefully constructed illusion. Lauren had manipulated every aspect of our lives to suit her own desires, leaving me to pick up the shattered remnants of trust and hope. The road ahead was daunting and uncertain, but as I gripped the steering wheel and took a deep, steadying breath, I knew one thing with unwavering clarity: I could no longer remain a passive victim of this betrayal. The events of that night had transformed me in ways I hadn't yet comprehended. I was now forced to confront a brutal truth about loyalty, love, and the deceptive masks people wear. My journey from that moment was not merely about seeking revenge or drowning in sorrow. It was about reclaiming the dignity and strength that had been eroded by lies. With each passing second, as the dark road stretched out before me, I resolved to search for answers. I would unearth the hidden motives, expose the rot that had infiltrated my world, and rebuild from the wreckage a future where trust was earned, not demanded. That night, amidst the ruins of a once-cherished life, I made a silent vow. No matter how tangled the web of betrayal might be, I would find my way out. The night was far from over, and as I slowly started the engine of my car, I felt an ember of determination kindle within me. The journey to understanding and healing had just begun, and every twist and turn along the road would eventually lead me to a truth I was both dreading and desperately seeking. The next morning, I woke with a cold, unyielding determination that I had never felt before. The remnants of last night's chaos still clung to the air, a bitter reminder that I could no longer allow her to occupy any space in my life. I made my way to our bedroom, where every designer piece of clothing, every meticulously chosen accessory, and every expensive appliance screamed of a shared life that had now soured into betrayal. I methodically gathered every item that had once symbolized the world we built together. Jewelry that sparkled with the illusion of commitment, cosmetics that she applied with careless vanity, and high-end gadgets that promised luxury but had long since lost their luster. One by one, I stuffed these remnants of our shattered dreams into large, black garbage bags. Each zip of the bag sealed away memories and a part of the life I thought I deserved. Standing there, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. This was my way of reclaiming control. Once the bags were full, I dragged them to the front of the house and set them down like a cold, silent declaration. Lauren was no longer welcome here. A few hours later, the sound of an engine rolling up the driveway shattered the stillness of the morning. I recognized the unmistakable purr of a Porsche, the very same car I had given her, a token of my love that had now become a tool of her arrogance. As she stepped out of the sleek vehicle, she glanced over at the roadside where the black bags lay in plain sight. Instead of shock or remorse, a mocking laugh escaped her lips, a sound that reverberated in my ears like a final, cruel jibe. Her laugh was a direct challenge, an assertion that nothing I did could ever truly shake her resolve. Not far behind her, Sean leaned casually against the car, his smirk and playful, cheeky jokes slicing through what little dignity remained in the air. His presence, once a friendly face from work, now felt like a constant reminder of the betrayal I had been forced to endure. With every taunt and every sly comment he made, it was as if he was rubbing salt into the fresh wounds of my heart. That was the last straw. In a moment that felt both surreal and inevitable, I strode forward with an iron resolve. I reached for her favorite white Gucci bag, the one she had clung to as if it were a lifeline, a tangible symbol of the luxury and status she so adored. It wasn't just any bag. It was worth $5,000, a price tag that, in that instant, epitomized everything I had sacrificed for a love that was never truly mine. Without a word, I gripped the bag tightly and marched over to the edge of our overgrown lawn, where a particularly filthy puddle marred the otherwise well-tended grass. Every step felt like a final goodbye. The water in the puddle churned with dirt and grime, a fitting mirror to the corruption of our past. In a swift, deliberate motion, I hurled the Gucci bag into the puddle. I watched, almost mesmerized, as it landed with a splash and sank into the murk, its pristine white exterior now soiled and defeated. The act was symbolic, a visceral, final severance of the ties that had bound me to a life of lies and half-truths. Standing there, I felt a tumult of emotions swirling within me. Anger, sorrow, liberation, and an emerging sense of clarity. The bag sinking into that dirty puddle wasn't just the end of a material possession. It was the final act of expulsion, a physical manifestation of the part of my life that I was finally ready to discard. In that moment, I realized that I had taken the first definitive step toward reclaiming my own identity, one untainted by betrayal and manipulation. I glanced back at the house, where the morning light revealed every mark of the previous night's devastation. I knew that nothing could erase the memories completely, but perhaps it was time to let go of what had poisoned my existence. I had expelled her from my life, not with words or angry tirades, but through decisive, irreversible actions that spoke louder than any farewell ever could. With a heavy heart but a clearer mind, I turned away from the scene. The discarded black bags and the ruined Gucci bag served as grim milestones on my path to healing, a path that I was determined to walk alone. Every step away from that house felt like a reclaiming of my future, a future where I would no longer be tethered to the ghost of a love that had proven to be nothing more than a lie. That day had been a relentless spiral of chaos. Earlier, I remember hearing Lauren's furious screams echoing down the street, a sound so raw it pierced the quiet of the afternoon. Moments later, I caught sight of her phone lying on the asphalt, its screen shattered like the remnants of our crumbling trust. That image of discarded technology, tossed aside in a fit of anger, was the first sign that Lauren was prepared to cross every boundary. As night fell, a violent crash shattered what little peace I had managed to cling to. I was in the living room, staring blankly at the flickering television when a deafening sound, like thunder but more deliberate, made me jump. I rushed toward the source of the noise and found that a brick had been hurled through the window, embedding itself in the shattered glass with a sickening finality. It wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a message, a clear, unambiguous signal that Lauren's fury was now spilling over into dangerous territory. Heart pounding, I bolted outside into the cool night air. The street was dimly lit, and as I scanned the darkness for any clues, my eyes locked onto a pair of red brake lights disappearing quickly around the bend. There was no mistaking them. They belonged to Lauren's car. In that brief moment, I felt a mix of disbelief and rising dread. Her actions were escalating far beyond bitter words and empty threats. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I reported the incident. I described the broken window, the ominous brick, and the fleeing car with red taillights. A desperate attempt to capture the chaos in words. Yet, even as I spoke, a grim certainty settled in. Without tangible evidence, the police would have little choice but to chalk this up to a senseless act of vandalism. Lauren had always been a master of evasion, able to twist every circumstance to her favor. I knew all too well that the system, as flawed as it was, wouldn't be able to hold her accountable this time either. With every second that passed, I felt the weight of my isolation deepening. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife or a betrayal of trust anymore. I was facing an enemy who had grown bold enough to physically invade my sanctuary. My heart raced as I realized that I couldn't rely on the police to deliver justice. Desperation mingled with a burning need for retribution, and I knew that if I was going to protect myself and reclaim my life, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. Without delay, I reached for my phone once more, this time dialing my lawyer. My mind was a swirling storm of anger and calculated resolve as I explained the situation. The shattered window, the ominous brick, the disappearing taillights, all evidence of a war that Lauren had now declared. As I spoke, I couldn't help but feel that this was more than a simple act of rage. There was something disturbingly methodical about the attack, as if it were orchestrated to push me to the brink and force my hand. Even as I detailed every detail to my lawyer, a twist of unsettling realization began to take shape in my mind. Rumors from work, whispers of clandestine meetings and late-night rendezvous hinted that Lauren's betrayal was even deeper and more calculated than I had initially believed. Was this the opening salvo of a larger scheme, a ploy to not only hurt me, but to entangle me in a web of legal and personal ruin? The possibility made my skin crawl, yet it also steeled my determination. I sat there in the dim glow of my phone's screen, my lawyer's measured voice on the other end outlining potential steps, while my thoughts churned with plans of my own. It was no longer just about ending our shared history or even seeking revenge for the myriad betrayals. I needed to dismantle the very foundation upon which Lauren had built her world of manipulation and deceit. I wasn't sure what the legal battle would entail, but I was resolved to make sure that she could no longer inflict pain without facing consequences. The silence of the night pressed in on me as I contemplated my next moves. Each shattered piece of glass from the broken window, each fragment of the violent act, seemed to echo the finality of our ruined past. The red brake lights, now nothing more than a distant memory, burned into my mind as a symbol of her unrepentant escape, a mockery of the life we had once shared. With a deep, steadying breath, I acknowledged that this was a turning point. The chaos, the betrayals, the physical manifestations of anger. It was all too much. But in that moment, as my lawyer and I laid the groundwork for a counterattack, I knew that I was no longer the passive recipient of her cruelty. I had reached the end of a road where silence was no longer an option. Revenge, in all its bitter, unresolved fury, was now the only path forward. I could feel a dangerous resolve solidify within me, a promise that I would not let Lauren's actions go unchallenged. Every moment, every shattered piece of glass, every echo of her departing taillights had forged within me a determination to fight back. I was ready to push back against the tide of her destruction, prepared to harness the full force of the law and my own will to reclaim control of my life. And in that dark, tense moment, I realized that this battle was far from over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom felt colder than any winter night I had ever experienced. A sterile, unforgiving arena where every word was weighed and every secret dissected under harsh fluorescent lights. It wasn't long after that fateful night when Lauren's audacious departure left me reeling that she struck back in a way I never expected. Out of nowhere, I received a formal notice. Lauren had filed a lawsuit demanding alimony of $20,000 a month. Not only that, but she was also claiming half of everything: our house, every last cent in our bank accounts, and even a stake in my company. It was as if she was determined to drain every resource from the life I had painstakingly built. For a moment, I wondered if this was yet another twisted move in her endless game of manipulation. A final stab meant to inflict more pain than any broken promise or shattered trust ever could. The sheer audacity of her demands left me speechless. But I quickly realized that I couldn't allow her to turn this painful chapter into a complete financial ruin. I knew I needed to fight back, and fast. I immediately reached out to the best lawyer I could find. Someone who had a reputation for turning even the most convoluted cases into undeniable wins. From the moment we began digging, it became clear that Lauren's carefully curated facade was beginning to crumble. My lawyer pored over statements, bank records, and credit card bills from the past 3 years, unearthing a trail of expenses that painted a damning picture. Every receipt and transaction told the same story. Lauren had spent over $180,000 on expensive hotels, lavish gifts, and extravagant vacations with Sean. The evidence was irrefutable. Here was a woman who claimed to be suffering financially, yet she was busy indulging in a lifestyle that I could never have afforded on my own. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal. Each dollar spent on those indulgences was a betrayal of every promise, every whispered hope for a future built on mutual respect. As the evidence mounted, the court sessions took on an almost surreal quality. The opposition's arguments began to collapse under the weight of meticulously documented proof. My lawyer laid out every single detail. Hotel receipts stamped with dates that coincided with Lauren's inexplicable absences, credit card transactions that showed extravagant spending even when our own finances were stretched thin, and even records of international trips that were never mentioned during our endless discussions about saving for a better future. It was a relentless barrage of facts that left no room for doubt. In a shocking twist that none of us had seen coming, the court not only dismissed her alimony claims, but went a step further. The judge ruled that her attempts to siphon off our assets were baseless and, frankly, a blatant abuse of the legal system. Lauren was ordered to forfeit any claim to half the house, the bank accounts, and most damning of all, her audacious bid for a share in my company was struck down completely. As if that wasn't enough, the court decided that she should also be held responsible for a significant portion of her legal fees and, yes, even the debts that had accrued from her own reckless spending. It was as though the evidence had not only dismantled her claims, but also forced her to confront the reality of her own financial irresponsibility. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt an odd mix of vindication and sorrow. Vindication, because every lie, every moment of deceit had finally been laid bare for all to see. Sorrow, because the battle had come at a great personal cost, a cost measured not just in dollars, but in the shattering of trust and the loss of what I thought was an unbreakable bond. In that moment, I realized that this legal victory was far more than just a financial reckoning. It was the culmination of months of torment, a final, decisive stand against a woman who had taken everything and left only ruin in her wake. Yet even as the courtroom battle drew to a close, I couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre twist that had led us to this point. Rumors had been swirling at work for months. Hushed whispers of clandestine meetings and extravagant outings that I had dismissed as idle gossip. Now, armed with undeniable proof, it became painfully clear that the truth was even more twisted than I had imagined. Lauren's double life, her reckless spending, and her unyielding thirst for a lifestyle that was never meant for her had all converged into a single, catastrophic event. In a cruel twist of fate, the very evidence that she had hoped would secure her a life of luxury ended up trapping her in a web of debts and shattered dreams. The courtroom verdict wasn't just a dismissal of her financial claims. It was a public unraveling of the persona she had so meticulously crafted. With every document presented, every line item scrutinized, the judge dismantled the illusion she had tried to sell piece by piece. In the end, she was left with nothing but the harsh reality of her own greed, facing mounting debts and a reputation that was irrevocably tarnished. Standing there in the aftermath of the legal storm, I felt a profound sense of relief. The battle had been long and grueling, but in reclaiming my assets and exposing her true nature, I had taken the first real step toward rebuilding my life. The scars of betrayal would undoubtedly linger, but they no longer held the power to dictate my future. With the courtroom drama behind me and a newfound determination lighting my way, I began to see a path forward, a path where trust, integrity, and hard-won justice could finally replace the bitter memories of the past. Looking back, I realized that this was more than just a legal victory. It was a personal renaissance. The journey had been marred by deceit and heartache, but it had also taught me a crucial lesson: that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it is buried. And as I move forward, piece by piece reclaiming the life that is rightfully mine, I know that I am stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever imagined possible. I remember the day I made the final move vividly. It was as if all the weight of the past year was converging into one decisive moment. In the months that followed the courtroom victory, I slowly rebuilt my life, piece by piece. One of the last acts of closure came when I decided to sell the Porsche. The car, which had once symbolized Lauren's unbridled sense of entitlement and ostentatious lifestyle, was registered in my name. Legally, that gave me the power to do as I pleased with it. I sold it for half its value, a calculated move that was equal parts financial prudence and poetic justice. Every detail of that sale, from the final signature to the handover of keys, felt like another nail in the coffin of our past. Not long after the deal was done, my phone started ringing off the hook. It was Lauren, her voice a volatile mix of fury and desperation, hysterics practically lacing every word. With each call, the undercurrent of chaos from our former life roiled up to the surface. I knew she expected some kind of apology, a plea for understanding, or maybe even an explanation. But as I answered one of those frantic calls, I kept my tone unervingly calm and said only, "You lost." Those two words, delivered with unwavering finality, were the culmination of everything that had happened between us. There was no triumph in spite, no bitterness lacing my words, just a cold, clear declaration that the scales had finally tipped in my favor. A year later, I found myself in an almost mundane situation that in retrospect felt loaded with meaning. I was in line at my local Target, waiting to pay for some everyday items, a stark contrast to the luxury and chaos that had defined so much of the recent past. As I approached the cashier, I looked up, and there she was, Lauren. The woman I once knew was larger than life, defiant, and unapologetically extravagant was now standing behind the counter, wearing a Target vest and a resigned expression that spoke volumes more than any argument ever could. For a split second, our eyes met. In that brief moment, I could see the ghosts of our former selves. Her eyes held a mixture of regret and resignation, as if silently admitting that the game was over. I wasn't surprised to see that her once vibrant spark had been dimmed by the relentless tide of consequences that followed her choices. There was no need for words. Our shared history was laid bare in that silent exchange. I reached into my pocket, took the small amount of change from the counter, and with a slow, deliberate nod, I walked away. That nod was more than just a goodbye. It was a final statement, a checkmate delivered without fanfare. In that moment, I understood that I had truly reclaimed my life. Every betrayal, every lie, every painful twist had led to this final, quiet victory. The very sight of Lauren behind her register, a far cry from the life of luxury she once flaunted, was the ultimate reckoning. I had taken back control, not through a storm of dramatic gestures, but with the cool, calculated resolve of someone who had finally found his footing. As I left the store, a quiet smile played on my lips. I knew that this was the end of our tangled chapter. The past, with all its sharp edges and broken promises, was behind me. In that silent moment of departure, I felt an undeniable sense of victory, a clear, unspoken message that I had not only survived the storm but had emerged stronger. And as I stepped into the cool afternoon light, it was as if the universe itself whispered, "Checkmate, Lauren."